In 1967, I was 17. I was born in 1950. So 1967, Dad was a local copper in Wellington, New South Wales. And Long Tan had happened in 66. And I was the last lot before the highest school certificate, that lot. So I think that had just come in. So I was in 5th year. And I just wanted to get out, basically. I wanted to join the army, get away, see a bit of adventure. So I left school early. I didn't do year 12, that they call it, the 6th year. So I left, but that was at the end of the school year, 66. I wasn't 17 until April in 67. So Dad said, he was a bit of a hard bastard, a hard bloke. He said, if you want to stay at home, you got to pay rent. Like this was in a police house. So I said, okay. So I went down the street and got a job at a merchant thing in Wellington for 3 months, and then I was begging Mum to let me travel to Sydney to join up. So I actually joined the army. I got my call-up papers on the 17th of May 1967. And never went back to Wellington, apart from about 10 years ago. In those days, it was a gorgeous little town. It's in a beautiful little valley. It's a beautiful little place, and it hasn't got the problems some people might have heard. It's got a few problems these days with some of the generations there, and also drugs. So, but in the day, back in the 60s, it was just beautiful. We used to play football at Dubbo and Mudgee and Orange, Bathurst. And it was just a really nice, good town for a kid to grow up in. Nice school, it's great. I was public school, Wellington High School. It was a lovely, just a really nice town. Dad was pretty hard. He was a 42-year New South Wales police sort of guy. Grew up during the Depression. He was really hard. So when a lot of my mates would be out, hitting the cricket ball around or doing this, I'd be chopping wood, mowing the lawn, weeding the garden, polishing his car, lighting the fire, helping Mum in the kitchen. So I didn't have a lot of free time. So they were good parents, lovely, but Mum particularly. But Dad was hard, and I just wanted to get out. And my sister, she'd already left to go to Teachers College at Wollongong. So it was a hard environment to live. Loving, yes, but just hard. Out of bed 6 o'clock, he'd come in and kick out of bed, get wood for the fire and do this, and help Mum in the kitchen. But this was all before school. So and I'd be chopping wood and bloody doing things 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, before I did my homework. So I just wanted to go. And the army. My uncle was in the Second World War, so the army was it. That's where I wanted to go. I mean, as a 17-year-old kid, you don't think. I don't think males grow brains until they're in their mid-20s. But I just wanted to go. And I wanted to do something, army, one of the combat corps, infantry, armour, artillery. So I joined at 17 and in York Street, Sydney, went to Eastern Command Personnel Depot at Watson's Bay. And that draft, about 40 of us, I think, caught a rickety old bus all the way down to Wagga, Kapooka, middle of winter, like May. And I remember going into this massive food hall at Kapooka. I think we got there at 2 o'clock in the morning. And Scott McKenzie's Streets, San Francisco was playing. I thought, oh, welcome. And anyway, we're straight into it. But I found, because I was in the school cadets, I was in charge of the rifle team, sergeant in charge of the rifle team, and all this sort of stuff. I loved the army stuff, and because of Dad's upbringing, discipline, getting up early wasn't a problem. So I think I almost breezed through recruit training. But then came, and it was a contradiction in terms, corps selection. And I wanted infantry, armour, artillery. So what they put me in? Ordnance. I got none of those. And so square peg, round hole, I was put into ordnance. So finished that, very disappointed, marched out, took the train up to Sydney. I was posted, my first posting was 2BOD at Moorebank, and I became a forklift driver. So if you picture it, Vietnam was in full swing. This is 67, just before Tet. It was all kicking off, and here I am driving a forklift in a big warehouse. Civvies were in charge. You'd see the one or two soldiers around the place. I was a very unhappy boy, very unhappy clam. And meanwhile, Dad had been posted all over the place, and he ended up. He lived in Eastwood. Then he was inspector in charge of Hornsby Police Station. So, you know, not happy, Jan, and I got into a bit of trouble because I actually wanted to get kicked out. You know, I thought I'll try the Navy maybe. I'll get kicked, not thinking that if you got disciplined out of the Army, you're not going to get in the Navy. I got into a little bit of trouble, ended up at MCE at Holsworthy for a 7-day stint for racing a forklift, crashed through a wall. And then we were doing Vic Barracks guards in Victoria Barracks at Sydney. We do the cenotaph, and I did about 7 of those. And while I was there on one guard, I collapsed on the front gate of Vic Barracks, and I had glandular fever and hepatitis. So while I was in hospital recovering at 2 Mill Hospital, Ingleburn, I was recovering from that. And the old sergeant in charge of the ambulances, he came up to me one day and he said, "Mate, I know you're in the shit back there. You're in a bit of poo. I've looked at your file," and he said, "We just lost one of our guys to Vietnam." He said, "How would you like to drive? I can get you temporarily posted to 2 Mill Hospital ambulance." So I did that for a while and loved that. A very good friend that I joined with, he at the Army, and he was at Kapooka with me. He wanted infantry, and he got Ramey, and he was in the warehouse next to me at Ramey Workshops. So he was a year older than me, so you had to be 19 to go to Vietnam, which I didn't think about. So he put in, when the S.A.S. selection committee came around, he put in for it, and he got it. And he went to Vietnam in 3 Squadron in 1969. So he said, when it comes around again and you're old enough, like I was still a kid, put in for it and I'll give you your first beret. So anyway, Julie came around again, and I was just short of my 19th birthday, and put in. For some reason they selected me. Must have been hard up for applicants or something, I don't know. And so then I went over to Perth, and I always remember my last shift at Moorebank, walking out in my overalls. I used to wear overalls. I mean, I was in the Army and I wear overalls. I drove a bloody forklift and a truck. Anyway, I walked out and all the civvies lined up and said, "Yeah, farewell." Or, you know, they said, "You won't even make it on the train trip to Perth. We'll see you back here in a week." And I said, "Right, I will never, ever come back to this place again. I will never see you people again." I never did. They put down the challenge and I took it up. In those days, during Vietnam, they put selection committees around and travel all around Australia to all the different units. And then they had a little panel. And I don't know where it was held. I think it would have been held at Imp Centre at Ingleburn or something in those days. So I just went up and did the interview. But they asked you, lots of various questions. And again, I don't know why they picked me, because there wasn't many, but they saw something in me, I guess. And they saw the desire to get out of where I was, because I was going to get into a bit of trouble. I was starting to pinch guns and everything. Bits of Owen guns and all that. I was going to assemble my own armoury. And so when I went over to Perth, and when I started, there was 74 of us on the we used to call it Cadre, now it's selection. 74 on the Cadre. When we finished, 6 or 8 weeks later, there was 4 of us. 4 out of 74. People had just disappeared during the night. Never knew why, and And I found it very difficult because a lot of the guys on the Cadre were from battalions, artillery, armour, SIGs, and my weapon handling skills were pretty crap. Navigation was crap. Fitness wasn't all that good. I was 9 stone wringing wet. And I'd do the runs, 20-mile runs, and my boots would be full of blood, and I'd have blisters bursting everywhere. And I'd just throw up, get on with it. And I think that and a really weird sense of humour got me through. I came back on a Yank R&R flight on a Pan Am flight, and there was about 10 Aussies. Anyway, we left Tonsanut, Saigon, and we drank the plane dry of all their booze before Singapore. Then we all had bottles of bourbon, big litre bottles of bourbon. We drank all that. It was almost out of Coke. So I think they replenished the Coke in Singapore. And then we were halfway across Australia in the middle of the night. And one of the Aussies said, we're out of booze. And one of the Aussies said, this Chanel No. 5, it's got alcohol base in it. And we all had Chanel No. 5 for our wives, girls, sweat, our mums and that, and Mickey Moto pearls, right? So we got these hostesses down, these Yanks couldn't believe it. And the other Yank soldiers would go, who are these guys? And we're drinking, putting Chanel No. 5 in a glass, fill up with Coke, drink it, burping everywhere, the beautiful fragrance of Chanel No. 5. And then we were flicking Mickey Moto pearls all around the aircraft, pinging, like take the thing off and boom. So my last scene as we staggered off the plane at Sydney at 3 o'clock in the morning or so, was these Yank air hostesses on their knees picking up these Mickey Moto pearls. Unbelievable. I just got off patrol 2 days before. I still had cam cream in my ears. Mum and Dad didn't recognise me. I was 9 stone, very sick, yellow, malaria, dysentery. And anyway, I went home. Normal thing. Couldn't stand it, so I went back early, back to Perth. Caught the train back early. Just didn't fit in. People were talking about football and this, and I just come from a war, and they paid lip service to you. So went back. The Nashos, however, they were literally demobbed. I don't know. I think they might have gone to ECPD if they lived in Sydney. ECPD, Watson's Bay. Literally the next morning they would have got up, done their pay, See ya. Because I've talked to a few Nashos since. We had about 50% of our squadron was national servicemen, which was unusual, but they were really good. And their transition back to Australia was like absolute zero. No debriefing, no medicals. You did a medical in Nui Dat before we left. Nothing. It was just pathetic. Anyway, so I was still in the army. So I went back and I thought I'd be in the barracks on my own. Anyway, 1s and 2s, they all started coming back. Same experience. Couldn't fit in. Nobody was interested. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, you're in Vietnam. Moving on. Who won the football? Like, really? And so we were there. Then I did quite a few courses. I was in for another, that was 71. I got out May 73, 6 years. But we didn't have any formal debriefs. We didn't have any psych, nothing. We didn't have anything. There was nothing. It was straight back into it. It was like, I think the first week that I was actually off leave and working, I was on a demolition course over at Rottnest Island. Like nothing. Nobody talked about it. That was just the way it was. And I don't think it was much different from any other reg. And I'm sure if you talk to Nashos, their return, I think Mitch might be a Nasho. Might have been a Nasho. Terrible. No formal debriefs or anything. Nothing. No decompression. Nothing. I got out in 73 because Labor, Gough Whitlam disbanded. They wanted to cut down special forces, so 2 squadron was disbanded. I was offered a Halo course in San Diego with the SEALs. I wanted to get married. I'd met this girl when I was in Ordnance in Sydney, and stupidly I got married and got out of the army. So I thought, geez, what am I going to do now? So Dad was in the police, and I thought, well, I don't think I'll end up being a bank Johnny. I think sitting behind a counter is going to be a bit rough after that. I was living adrenaline all the time, fast card on MGB and bloody on the booze all the time, and so I thought the police force. So while I was still in the regiment, I applied for the ACT police. So I joined the ACT police. Came over to Sydney and did the interview for the ACT police in Sydney at Phillip Street. And I remember I was in full uniform, battle dress with wings and medals and everything. And this old guy pulled up next to me at a pedestrian crossing. And he looked across at me and he saw the S.A.S wings, which is quite distinctive. And he said, "You an S.A.S?" And all it had on our shoulder flash was Special Air Service Regiment, not Australia. And he said, "Are you from England?" And I said, "No, mate, we're Australia." He said, "Oh, didn't." He was Second World War Royal Marine Commando. Didn't realise the Australians had S.A.S. And anyway, did the thing and obviously passed, and then joined the police in June '73. 2 days after I got married. Got married at Granville. Stayed overnight at the Collector pub. Bride and I drove down the MGB, and then I took the oath on Monday morning. Quick transition. No honeymoon. Dad, because he was in New South Wales, you might remember there was a Springbok tour in 1971 too, in Canberra, all around Australia, but before apartheid. But there was a lot of demos here, and New South Wales police were brought down to help pad out the local plots, and he knew the inspector in charge of recruiting here. Unbelievably, he was ex-New South Wales police. And he said, "Oh, the young fella's in the army, he's thinking he might get out, join the police." So he said, "Tell me about the ACT. I can tell you about New South Wales. Tell me about the ACT." Well, the ACT police had better salaries in those days, better equipment. New South Wales police was on the bones of his bum, quite frankly. And you don't get travel out, because I went to 4 or 5 different schools. So, and the bonus was that if we have kids, the kid, Canberra, that's it. Because in those days it was the ACT, not AFP. And I said, "Oh, okay." So I wrote away to him, got the thing, did the interview, came back, we'll have you. So I came over, and in my course of about 30, there was about 7 ex-Vietnam veterans. So rest is history. Joined that in '73, got out in '98, went back to Timor in '99. My dad applied to go to Cyprus in New South Wales Police in 1965 or something, and I remember he and Mum having a bit of a discussion, brackets, in the kitchen about she didn't want him to go. And she won, he didn't go. Anyway, up until '76, the Commonwealth Police sent police to Cyprus. Then it went over to the states, so the state police forces had it, and the AFP had it. ACT police went over, and then we morphed into the AFP in '79. And then I was on the first AFP contingent in 1980. So half our contingent was Commonwealth Police and ACT Police, and we were the first AFP contingent in 1980, and I just applied for that. I was on the bikes then, I was on motorbikes. I did 13, 14 years on motorbikes, pursuit cars, all that. Rescue squad, I went to Darwin in '74, cyclone tracing. I just wanted to go. Marriage wasn't going really well. So she, I think, willingly let me go, gladly let me go. And in those days, the tour was about 18 months. That was later cut down to 12 months, then 6 months, and then back to 12 months. So I went over there 18 months, came back in 1981, end of it, got divorced, went back to traffic. A couple of guys got sent home for some reason. They asked me to go back again, so I went back and did 3 years full up in Cyprus. Loved it. Finally, I did WITSEC, Witness Security. That was pretty exciting. Travelled all over Australia with some very interesting criminals. Did 5 years there, then got promoted sergeant in the AFP, and then transferred over to VIP protection. I did 5 years there, and I was in charge of the Turkish protection team for a while. Then the first Gulf War, 91, I was hived off that and given to Bob Hawke. With him for about 6 months. Loved it. That's another story. And then while I was there was a vacancy came up on the Governor General's team, which was deemed to be that's the creme de la creme of jobs in VIP protection, close personal protection, because you travelled on your own with the P, and the risk factor with the Governor General was a lot less than the PM or anybody else. So anyway, my name was put forward to do the replacement, so I went in and then worked out at Government House with Bill Hayden, Bill in Dallas, and I was with him. We flew up to Ipswich on the day that he was finished in the job, and the clock went tick tick. He was no longer the Governor General, and Sir Zellman, William Dean took over. So I was with him for 2 years, and then somebody in personnel decided that Don Barnby's had a bloody good career. He's had a lot of fun. So I think there's that word again, see? I think we'll redevelop this guy, and he needs to sit behind a desk for a while to calm down. So I ceased, in my mind, being a policeman. I was offered the 4th or 5th floor in headquarters here in Canberra. So I just said, eeny, meeny, miny, I'll take the 4th, and I think it was Interpol. So I handed in my gun. I used to take police cars home and police bikes, travel. No more uniform. I packed my little lunch. I caught the bus to work. I became a public servant. And all the guys in the office, they all knew me. And I walked in and they'd always say, "And how are we this morning, Barney?" And I'd say, "Just peachy." And, they'd get me a coffee, sit me down. It's all right, calm down. I did 2 years there. I was told to do 2 years, and I did 2 years. But I travelled thousands of miles a day on the computer, talking to Paris and, bloody Chicago, New York and Washington and all over the place. But it just killed me. I mean, I was like a caged tiger. And while I was there, Bougainville kicked off. Our role was to patrol the buffer zone, which went from east to west of the island. And when I was there in 1980, 81, then came back 82, went back 83, 84, the Danes were in the west of the island. Then the next ones were the Brits. Then the Canadians were in Nicosia. They were on the buffer zone in Nicosia. Then the Swedes were down near Larnaca. And then the Austrians were over near Famagusta. So our job is, and we were based at a place called Kikino Trimathea, just outside Nicosia. Our job was to patrol the buffer zone, checking on, going out and investigating any incursions by either Greeks or Turks. They weren't allowed in the buffer zone, but they did, because the buffer zone cut through farming land. And as usual, they wanted to plough right, as much as they could. So they'd make incursions into the buffer zone. So we'd go out and sort of, naughty. We'd take them if they were Greeks, to the local police station, Turks the two. And we'd tell the local coppers, this guy has, started to plough 100 metres in the buffer zone, he can't do that. So they'd blah, blah, blah. And then we'd take him back, put him back on his tractor and say, have a good day, and off we go. We also did a lot of liaison with all the different contingents, and that usually involved a lot of booze, because particularly the Danes with the Gameldansk and the Brits with the beer. And anyway, we investigated any incidents that happened within the buffer zone. One of our investigations was a British nurse was raped by some Turk soldiers. A Greek was yelling obscenities to a Turk soldier in Nicosia. Buffer zone was a street wide, most of the areas in that area. and yelling obscenities. So this Turk shot him. That was a murder. Other ones were starting a fire in the buffer zone to clear land, which they weren't allowed to do. Mine incidents. Somebody would find a mine on the edge of their thing, so we'd go out and then we'd call the army. They patrolled the buffer zone, but the Brits had a scout car squadron, little ferret scout cars, and their roving commission was from the west of the island, where the Danes were, all the way down to Famagusta, as ours was. But we used to butt up on Sector 5 or Sector 4 where the Swedish police were. They had the other contingent of police there was Swedish police. So the Aussie police and Swedish police. And we'd go down and then they say, we'd ask them, have you guys done a patrol through to Famagusta or Varosha any recently? No, we haven't been down there for it. So we'd go down there because good swimming place. Beautiful old Roman ruins and under the sea, and it's just good. So we go down there, do a patrol there, and then come all the way back. And our base was generally at KT, Catino Trimethea, but we also had a little section down at Leedra Palace Hotel, right inside Nicosia with the Canadian Army. They were at a big, totally wrecked hotel, but that was their base. So the ones that were down there usually did the patrols within Nicosia, doing what you had to do, all the way down to Famagusta, and then the ones at Kikino KT, we did from Sector 2 all the way back up to the Danes, right up the top. Beautiful scenery, going through Turkish enclaves and all this sort of stuff, Maronite enclaves. I mean, the scenery was beautiful. Back in the 80s, it was very untouristy. Now the little tracks that we used to drive on are now 3-lane highways, 4-lane highways. It's really little village of Paphos down south along the east coast. It used to be a little fishing village with a little lighthouse and a Maronite castle or something. It was beautiful. Now it's apparently high-rise hotels that have beautiful rock-cut tombs and mosaics, and the Greeks just bulldozed a lot of this stuff. Unbelievable. When we first got there on the 23rd of April 1980, 2 days before Anzac Day. So we had a 2-week changeover with the Commonwealth Police that had previously been there. And one of the questions we asked was, where's a good restaurant? What's the food like here? And it was really funny flying in I'd never been to the Middle East, but I'd been to Europe at that stage. And flying into Larnaca from Athens, middle of summer, or hot, everything was dry. I felt at home. I had this deja vu. I'd been here before. I was a Crusader's saddle or something, but I didn't feel out of place. I knew how it was all going to work. Other guys had never been anywhere like that, and they were going, "Wow, like this, there's ruins everywhere, and this and that." And the way of life, cigar, slowly, langsamer, and I took all that for granted. It didn't faze me at all, because I can be a bit impatient with fools or people that don't know what they're doing. But the Greek way of life and the Turkish way of life, very slow, but I fit it in straight away. And we flew. We asked some of the guys in the Compol, where's a good restaurant? So we went there, normal time, 7 o'clock, right? So we all rock up for a mezzo, and nobody in the restaurant. Oh, yeah. They're having us on, right? Having us on. No. People start coming to the restaurant at 10 o'clock at night. We'd eaten, gone, and then they came in. So that was our first lesson in, siesta. Everything shuts down from 12:30. You can't do any business in Cyprus after 12:30, 1 o'clock, till about 3:30, particularly in summer. Everything shuts down. It was that way of life. The social life was incredibly social. The Australians at KT, Kikino Trimethea, we were just over from the British base at St David's Camp. We had the best bar in the UN in Cyprus. The beer was cold. We had Carlsberg, Kio or S.A.S Turkish beer. The beer was cold, but we also chilled the glasses, right? Because you'd go to the POMs and have drinks. I was an inspector on my first brevet rank, inspector on my first 18 months, and then they changed it slightly, and I went back as a senior sergeant. And the actual force commander, the Canadian force commander, he said, Barney, he said, he was there on my first one as the force commander, and he was still there. He said, hit a hurdle, mate? And I said, no. I said, they've just changed the brevet. He knew that we weren't inspectors. I was only a senior connie on my first one, and I was still a senior connie, so it was just brevet ranks. Because you had to have that rank to deal with the Civpol of the Greeks and the Turks. They respected rank. It was very sociable. So we had cocktail, all the contingents. It's just like the DFAT round of drinks in Canberra. All the embassies go to everybody else to celebrate, whatever day. And they all used to love coming to ours. But we had a very hectic social schedule. And we were taught as part of the protocols. And I ended up buddying up with a British officer. And they're very good at that M&Ming, mix and mingling. You talk to each group. If they're at your venue, you have to entertain them. So I became very good at, and I don't like that. I'm out of my depth there. I used to work behind the bar or do the barbecue, so I didn't have to talk to people all the time. Of course, they talk rubbish all the time. So I'd talk over one group 5 minutes, and the Brit, they had it down to a T, because their officer commanding would be watching all the young subbies entertaining the guests when it was over at St David's camp. So they'd almost time them, blah, 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 move on, no, nice to meet you, and off they go. So I started that routine. And it was very sociable with the Swedes and the Danes and whatever. And the Danish, DanCon, it was always a drink fest. I love the Danes because they're very similar to Australians. They love life, they love drinking, and they're just merry people. The Swedes, lovely people, but they took everything very seriously. Quick instance, a bloke and I were sent out to an incident that was happening in the buffer zone in the Swedish sector. This farmer was ploughing too far out of the buffer zone. So the Swedes had sent a platoon, 40 men armed. They had weapons, we didn't. Armed to stop this farmer ploughing. And what they were doing, Joe and I pulled up in the Land Rover and we just watched and we go, what are they doing? They were running behind, in marching order, running behind the tractor, yelling out for him to stop in Greek. And we said, okay. So we waited till they came around the big circle and we went around and we stopped them. And he just kept ploughing. And we said to the young officer, Swedish officer, we'll handle it. So we went up, parked right in front of his tractor in the Land Rover. Joe took the key out and I got him out of the seat. Explained to him, showed him the book in Greek, you're not allowed to do. We said, just get in, your CACT will be fine. Put him in the Land Rover, took him down to the local Cypriot police. They read the riot act to him, took him back, put him on his tractor, and he never did it again. Threat level indicator out of 5, it'd be a level 1. Most of the time, while I was there, I can't remember whether it was first or second tour there, there was a coup, a Turkish coup in Turkey. So the Turks got a bit edgy and brought some tanks over to Cyprus. So then the Greeks got a bit nervous and then they brought tanks over. So there was a bit of a Mexican standoff for a while. That was a bit touchy, but the level of threat level towards UN personnel on Cyprus in UNFICYP, I would say 1. Occasionally it would blip up to 2 and then back down. No, threat level was, I mean, it was always, unless something untoward happened, which can always do it. But generally it was a fairly manageable situation all the time. There was little incidents, there'd be little blips, a little like when the Turk shot the Greek. There was all, everybody arced up a bit and but never anything to start a full-scale, conflagration again. Pretty low. Before the Turkish invasion in '74, Turks and Greeks used to live in the same village, parts of Nicosia, whatever, they were hand in glove. And to quote a story to illustrate that, we used to spend a lot of time in the Turkish areas because they were just fun, and you go up to Kyrenia. But I remember going across to a Turkish tailor he'd measure us up for a suit it was clothes, and he would then give you the name of his Greek friend on the Greek side to go and make it. He'd get the material, cut it, and then the Greek would make it. And while I was doing that once, because he knew we worked both sides of the buffer zone all the time, but in the middle. And he gave me a letter from his wife to the wife of the Greek tailor. He said, we haven't seen each other since '74, but they still keep in touch. So would you mind? And if you want to be really pedantic, it was wrong of me to do that. But I said, yeah. So I put the letter in there. I didn't tell anybody about it at the time. And then when I went to the Greek tailor, I said, this is from Ismail or something. Oh, thank you. So she wrote a letter and then somebody else took it back. So those little relationships carried on. Generally, the populace of both sides were accepting. There was atrocities, that has to be said. There was atrocities and there was mass graves and bodies found and all that sort of stuff. But that mainly happened up in Enosis and all that, the separation of Greece and Turkey. Right up until the Turkish invasion in '74, and then there was a lot of stuff happening around that period. But when I went there in 1980, it was fairly benign. There was still the standoff. They couldn't travel. The border wasn't opened. We used to do south and north wind patrols, we used to call them, and there was Maronites villages and enclaves, and particularly in the north, Greek Maronites that still live there. So we'd load up a British convoy of food trucks and we'd go through the Turkish checkpoint, which we used to go through every day, basically, we did. But once a month we'd go up with about a convoy of about 4 big trucks full of flour, eggs, veggies, rice, all that sort of stuff. And we'd go up into the end of the mountains of northern Cyprus and we'd do a humanitarian patrol, give them all this stuff. And then we'd take letters from them to their Maronite friends that lived in another little enclave down near Limassol on the Greek side. So then we'd just do these south and north wind patrols. So, but generally, the situation was fairly, this is me looking at it, having been in a few interesting situations elsewhere in the world. It was fairly benign. There was never any danger of, say, while we were doing the buffer zone on patrol, with our white Land Rover, a big red rat, kangaroo on each side, UN flag flying, you didn't think you were going to get whacked by a sniper. So, but occasionally we played pranks on the Turkish-Greek checkpoint. I used to love going through the Greek checkpoint and say, good morning in Turkish, and they'd go, what? Oh, bloody Australians. And then the same in the Turks. I'd speak Greek to them, And I remember one day, names will go unmentioned, but those masks you put on, one of the bloke that was next to me put on the gorilla mask, the rubber mask, and I put on the old witch's nose with the big nose with the wart on it. We had our blue berets on, and we were going through, and we went, "Yeah, sir, Filimu, and all this," and they went, "What?" And they looked at these two UN, one with a big nose and a gorilla face. So and they just thought we were mad, and we got on really well with both sides. Whereas the military component of the UN didn't mingle as much as we did. They were confined mainly to their region of the buffer zone, whereas our work we used to go to Kyrenia to have meetings with the Turkish police commander up there on stuff that affected their side of the buffer zone, and then we'd do the same on the Greek side. So we mingled a lot more than the UN military guys did. They saw a little bit of Cyprus, we saw all of Cyprus, everywhere, every bit of it. So ours was a fairly well a roving commission, which was great, and they loved the Australians because, like I think Melbourne has the third biggest Greek population in the world, Thessaloniki, Athens, and whatever. So, we got on, and the Turks loved us. They saw my ribbons, and they said, "Oh, army, Gallipoli." We'd talk that, and have a couple of beers and whatever. So. There was Commonwealth Police. They were responsible for guarding government installations. They also had guys stationed in Australian High Commissions and embassies overseas. They also did investigations under the Commonwealth Crimes Act. The ACT Police was the local village police force for Canberra and Jervis Bay, like the New South Wales Police. And in 1979, under Sir Colin Woods, British ex-commissioner of police over there, he came up with the concept of amalgamating the ACT Police, the Commonwealth Police and the Narcotics Bureau all together to form a federal police with jurisdiction in Australia, in all states of Australia, and also in the embassies. So the federal police these days has jurisdiction in Canberra, all around Australia and all its territories, and also at all their embassies and high commissions. We have a liaison officer, 2 liaison officers, who then deal with crime, say in Athens. We have somebody in Athens or in Washington. Any crimes pertaining to Australian citizens or that might affect drug smuggling, organised crime, South America, all this, they're our conduit or liaison officers in those areas, and we converse with them daily. And when I was in Interpol, I used to be talking to the AFP liaison officer in Washington all the time, or London, and so now it's a worldwide police force. Probably not the FBI. The FBI's got a bit of a different role, but so we have jurisdiction everywhere. But it was amalgamation of those 3 agencies: Compol, ACT, and Narcotics Bureau. Bloke came into me one day and he said, "Barney, you know what's Bougainville? Heard about that?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." And he said, "We're sending some people over." He said, "It's a pretty rough sort of mission, but interested?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll go." So I was put on TMG. There was 2 of us, and the other guys from Interpol too. He went to Booker, and I went to Savelli and Tonu, south of the island near Bouen. He had the best, really dream run, because Booker was that island off the top of Bougainville, and they did sea patrols all around the place, diving and eating fish every night, and wow, this is fun. I was in the jungle swamps and mountains of Bougainville down near bloody Bouen, where a couple of Victoria Cross would win down there. I think Frank Partridge might have got his VC down there somewhere. It was a crap hole. And I was with TMG, Truce Monitoring Group, and that was with the Kiwis. And most of the guys in my little camp were Kiwi S.A.S. I didn't tell them. They had heard that I was ex-S.A.S. So I became the father of all these young Kiwi S.A.S. guys. And we used to do, our main mission was to explain the Wellington Agreement, I think it was, the truce, and do patrols, literally patrols. Occasionally they dropped us off by chopper, but the Kiwis only had 2 Hueys. Their military defence budget was pretty low. The Land Rovers we had kept blowing up and falling apart because they were just 1970 model, and they were just crap. But we did some really long patrols up into the mountains, spreading the word, listening to villages. I had a twofold role of getting, if they wanted to talk to me, any atrocities that had been at, because the BIG, the Bougainville Independent Group, and the Bougainville Revolutionary Army, Big Bra, they were sort of kicking off all over the place and running riot through some of these villages and committing atrocities. But mainly the atrocities that I took down details of, that I don't think were ever investigated, but were by the PNG Army when they were doing stuff there. They hated they called them Redskins, the Bougainvillians, lovely, lovely people. They hated the Redskins, the PNGians, because they're black, 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 purple, black. And they're really quite intelligent. I remember I was up in a little village somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and the village chief, we'd pile in, like 3 days walking up these bloody mountains, and we'd get in there totally dripping wet, been through swamps and rivers and everything. But the chief had always come up to me because I had grey hair, and the Kiwi lieutenant that I was with, in charge of it, he was a young kid, 25. So they just ignored him. They wouldn't go. They'd come up to me and they'd talk to me. So he got a bit pissed off about this. But I explained to him why they respect elders. I don't know why, but they do. And I remember walking into this one village, and this guy came up to me, a pair of stubbies and a St Kilda footy jumper on, and we'd learned a bit of Pissonnet language at DFAT before we left, which is useless because I'd learned a bit of Pidgin while I was in New Guinea in the army, and then I tried to learn Pisson. No good. Anyway, this guy I started asking him tentatively, blah, 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 in Pisson. And he said, "It's all right, mate, I speak English." I said, "Oh, well, so where do you learn that?" He said, "I did an engineering degree at Monash Uni." Really? Seriously? Unbelievable. No, they were classic. They were really lovely people. Beautiful. My mission was called the TMG, Truce Monitoring Group, under the Kiwis. They took it off initially. That morphed when I left into the PMG, Peace Monitoring Group, and that was under the auspices of the Australian Army. But within that organisation, military-wise, there was Fijians, Samoans, Vanuatuans, a couple of other regional police and military people that worked over there under the umbrella of, well, when I was there, the Kiwis. The Kiwis ran the show for, I think, the first 18 months. The Wellington or the Dunedin Agreement. And it was all about the Panguna mine, the gold and copper mines and the PNGians. There was a lot of dispute about the copper mine, the Panguna mine, which was up in the mountains of Bougainville. And the Bougainvillians wanted independence. They wanted to be independent from PNG because PNG actually had jurisdiction over Bougainville, and they had military and police there. And as I said before, a lot of the atrocities that I was informed about were perpetrated by PNG Army or police against the Bougainvillians because they didn't want the Bougainville to secede from PNG. So our job mainly was, under the auspices of the New Zealanders at that stage, was to talk about the peace process, trying to calm and get people to the table to talk about it, and they did have quite a few meetings, I think, in Dunedin in New Zealand in those days, to talk about seceding from PNG. I don't know what role the PNG military and police have in Bougainville these days, but back in '98 it was there was a lot of them there, and they were not liked by the Bougainvillians. There was a lot of atrocities. So our role was to go to villages and try and talk to them through interpreters. We had a couple of little guys to go run around with us because they'd chat. I worked with a girl most of the time from AusAid. She was brilliant because Bougainville is a matriarchal society, and the women generally wouldn't talk to me when we'd talk about other stuff. We would, the military guy, the lieutenant, and me would talk for hours and they'd go through every sentence of this Dunedin or Wellington agreement. It'd take hours. Miserable, and you'd be in a grass hut. It'd be the pouring rain or humid and everything, stinky. There would be guys sitting up the back with machetes, digging the pus out of their jungle tropical ulcers in their legs, and they looked quite mean. Some of the guerrilla movements, big bra, they were pretty fierce. So they'd be sitting up the back sometimes, they were there because the chief would point them out. They didn't cause any trouble, at least in my experience. But then I would get Leanne to get the women aside, and I'd explain through the interpreter away from the PNG. We're often accompanied by a PNG copper or military guy who wanted to listen in, but I'd explain through the interpreter to the chief, Leanne's here to listen to the women. If they've got anything they want to talk about, leave this meeting and go off and chat. So she'd come to me with lots of notes, and then that night I'd be writing up all this. I also had in my team a girl from DFAT and a civilian from ADF Russell. They were really good, and it was a really hard mission. I mean, very quickly, a quick story, at Savelli, which was a satellite station of Tonu, which was my main base. That was in a swamp in the lowlands, but up in the mountains there was another swamp, Savelli. It was a little village, and we had a little grass hut. The roof was riddled with bullet holes, rained all the time. And we had one of the Land Rovers parked outside the hut, and the next morning we went out and it had been sucked into the bog, and it was up to the top of the doors, and we couldn't dig it out, and we got the chopper and we tried to get it, and it was just stuck. We lost 2 on river crossings on the Piriata River. The conditions were really bad. We had an outside drop toilet, a hole in the ground, and you'd go out there with a machete or a golf club because there was rats everywhere, mean-looking big rats, and cane toads. And you'd be just, because I had the runs while I was there, as I said, lost 12 kilos. And you'd be sitting hunched over this little hole in the ground, trying to go to the toilet in the middle of the night, and there'd be all these little pink-eyed rats and bloody cane toads jumping in. Oh my God, it was just disgusting. It was just terrible. And these, I'd been, bloody hell, been through Vietnam, so it was hard. But for these poor kids, the DFAT girls, they did really well. We did our training for Bougainville in Bamaga, at Cape York, and they didn't even know how to use a can opener to get the tins of rations open, and they didn't know how to pitch a hoochie, and so we had to teach them all. I had to teach them all that sort of stuff. But they did really well, and I was so proud of them. They were all given a medal when we got back at DFAT. I didn't get one because the police force didn't give us one. But they all got their medal, and I went there and I had a little speech, and there were the tears coming down because they did really, really well in incredibly trying, and they didn't complain. It was just crap. We all got a bit sick, and they did really well. They were very religious, obviously, and every Sunday they liked members of the TMG to go to the church service. Well, the church services went from 1 to 4 to 6 hours. That's a lot of sitting on bamboo slats, I tell you. But anyway, but there was a reason why I became very religious. At the end of the church service, the local village women would make a feast. So there was fish and rice and all these native vegetables. The food, because we had New Zealand Army rations, which are absolute crap. Chlorinated water with New Zealand Army instant coffee. Oh, not good. So we'd do that, but also during the church service, the young girls had formed a choir, the village choir, and they sang these beautiful songs. Their voices were so beautiful that I took an old tape recorder in my day and taped it, because they'd sing all these religious songs, and then some of them, not all, some of them would then go into this. It was like a religious frenzy. They'd almost, they'd go into this stupor, like you probably see in black magic things in Jamaica and the West Indies. And some of them would collapse on the floor and they'd just, go all over the place. It was all part of the experience, but again, the main driver to go was this beautiful food afterwards, because for the next 6 days you'd be eating rubbish. And that was Bougainville. I got horribly sick. I lost a lot. I lost 12 kilos. I almost had blood coming out of every orifice, my eyes, ears, my infection, back, front, whatever, because everything was polluted, and we had water resups was down at the local river, and all villages in all those countries use the river as the sewerage. Rubbish, all the things. So whenever we were having a bit of a scrub up in the river, one of us would be detailed to sit up on the bank and do peck or puck, and I always would get them all mixed up. But peck is human poo, and puck is crocodile. So, you'd sit up there, yell out, puck, peck. There'd be either a turd coming down or a crocodile swimming down. Unbelievable. So I got infected. I got ear infections, and we all got, really sick. Because of these nuts, these guerrilla groups, if they got on the jungle juice, they used to make their own booze. They could be, we often had reports of go to a village, there's shots, and somebody was grabbed and taken, and because they'd kidnap the young girls sometimes, and so that was a bit more tenuous. I remember I met the head of the local guerrilla group in our area one day, and I was taken to visit him, and while I was talking to him, I was just eyeballing this guy, and he was high on jungle juice. His eyes were literally rolling around his head, and he had that stare. They were bloodshot. His breath smelled. He had a big beard. He had a gun over his shoulder, and I was just having a bit of a chat through the interpreter. And I went away and I said to the young Kiwi lieutenant, I said, geez, mate, he was a really scary guy, because, he could go overboard. No personal violence towards me, but the latent level of, he could switch on a heartbeat if you said the wrong thing. So I kept it pretty businesslike. And what's a wontok? Is it wontok? They have a funny thing. He thought we were going to give them presents, because that's what we had to do, but we didn't do it. So he was a bit, like angry. Anyway, that all went well. We were unarmed. The military guys were unarmed. Nothing. Didn't have anything. And the chopper, as I said, the Kiwis had about 2 or 3 Hueys, and they were all back at Arawa, not where we were, and we were up in the mountains somewhere. So if we got in the poo, used to go with a Kiwi SIG, and he could get comms to Arawa. So if we really got in the deep doo-doo, you'd have to radio through. Well, we didn't have any flare-ups while we were there. and the peace process went on. I think the PMG, one of their main roles was to de-arm the militias and the guerrillas. So we laid the groundwork, explaining the peace process, and I think the PMG, so they disarmed a lot of the guerrilla groups that were there. So I would assume that I think the mission did what we had to do. It was quite successful. One side story, there was a lot of munitions around from the Second World War, and we had identified this area with a lot of old aerial bombs and naval shells and everything, and grenades and Japanese stuff. And so we got organised it through Arabs and Kiwis, and the bomb disposal team they sent up to us was a PNG Army one. And these guys were cowboys. Anyway, we loaded a lot of this stuff on. It was all rusted in the back of a couple of old utes. And then we had to go and we were going to blow it up at the sea, which was a fair way, about probably 20 k's. It took us about 6 hours to get. The roads were terrible. And they piled all this stuff, dug a bit of a hole in the beach. I took photos of this, dug a big hole in the beach, piled all these bloody artillery shells and naval shells, aerial bombs, big stuff. And then they wired it all up. And we went down and we were going, Jesus. And the Kiwi guys were with me. And we all knew munitions, this stuff's going to go bang. So they went back about 600 metres. No, we went back about 1.5 kilometres up the beach. And then we heard it through the radio, where we had radio comms with it. Yeah, blowing it now, fire in the hole. And wow, half of it went unexploded. It was blown out to sea, back into the jungle. There was grenades smoking, still going into seriously? Yeah, that was interesting. Then I said, oh, well, now we're down near the coast, because I never got to swim the whole time I was there. And I thought, we'll go for a swim. So we all stripped off, just about to jump in, and we looked offshore, and there's these fins circling around about 100 metres off the beach. No, so then we all got bitten by sandflies. So it was a lot of fun. Yeah. I am a firm believer that when you look at history, things that have happened in history, you look at those historical happenings in the context of the geopolitical or whatever situation then. You do not look at, like our involvement in Vietnam, you do not look at our involvement in Vietnam in the 21st century mentality. At the time, the domino theory and all the rest of the stuff, it was there was a lot of, I've read a lot about the political machinations that were going on and to and fro, and the Americans and all the rest of the stuff, the Australians, but I still think that we should have gone under the ANZUS agreement. I think that we did do the right thing at that stage. We all have, well, at least I have, and most people I speak to have, got regrets about the way we left. It's exactly like the way we left East Timor. It was a lot of parallels there. We thought we were going to be there and see it to its conclusion, but the war went off the pallet back in America, Australia, New Zealand, whatever. That was the reason we sort of did it. We did very well in our area of Phuoc Tuy and in Vietnam. The Yanks thought we did a good job. I think we should have been there, and without being too flippant, I think it was the best training an army can have, is to be operationally deployed. There's nothing worse than an army that is not operationally deployed, because when they do have to go, they've got no corporate knowledge. Now, I've always said, because I spent a bit of time with the Israeli army over in the Middle East and Israel, and they're the most combat-ready defence force in the Middle East and possibly parts of the world, because they're flying operational missions, their Air Force, their military is on standby all the time, and they really know what they're doing. So you need that operational awareness and currency, because a peacetime army, it's doomed to failure unless it even if it does UN missions, like East Timor and stuff like this, because that's what you do. It's like being a brain surgeon and being scared of the sight of blood. Well, if you join the military and you don't want to go operational, what the hell are you doing in the military? Join the public service or something. What the hell are you doing there? That's your job. So I wanted to go. I actually, when they notified us that 2 Squadron was being withdrawn, and that was the last squadron in Vietnam, quite a few of us tried to put in for the training team to stay there, because we only did 9 months, a tour was 12 months. I wanted to stay. We were doing a great job. We were well trained, professional. We knew what our bloody operational orders and bloody standard SAPs were. We were doing a good job. So, and that was our job, because when I came back to Australia, they disbanded 2 Squadron. We did, between the S.A.S. in that period, between 71 and 79, when they adopted the C2 counter-terrorism role, there was that period that I know a lot of guys were in the regiment during that period. I got out, a lot of them stayed in. They did nothing. They were never going to be sent anywhere except on courses or training exercises. And it was just like, we were trained to a peak of professional, like we were good, we were bloody good. But we hadn't, it's like a boxer, or an athlete, training, never to be used and never to run a race. And you think, what the hell, why? That's why I got out. I couldn't see a future just doing courses. There was no purpose to the training, and it is hard training. We've lost more people on training exercises in the regiment than we have in combat. So that just shows you how realistic the training we do. I wanted to go. I'm glad I did, and I have no regrets. And I think we did a good job. And the Vietnamese, I've been back many times since. They love the Uktalois, they love the Australians. Not so much the Americans. I went back with an American SEAL years ago, back in 2005, and every time he'd open his mouth, the Vietnamese would turn away. They were very polite, but they'd turn away, whereas I'd talk, Uktaloi, yeah, where's the nearest toilet or change station? They'd talk to me, and he started to get, and I said, mate, well, America had a different role, and they've got a bit of history here, bad history. The Australians, we respected our enemies, we treated them well, we killed a lot, but they killed a lot of us. But we were professional soldiers. There's no war crimes coming out of the Australian side of it. Not that has been proved. There's a few allegations around, but certainly none in S.A.S. We had none of that. So